In this video, we're going to build a one-shot MetaSound so that every time this MetaSound is called, it's going to pick a random sound wave from a set of sound waves that you're going to determine. Just before we jump into that, you can see that I'm still using the column view for the content browser, but I've thinned it out a bit so it's a bit less confusing. If you right-click here on the columns, you can decide which ones you want to see. So I've just kept the ones visible that are kind of useful for us at the moment. So that's a useful way of keeping that a bit more readable. So let's create our MetaSound. So we're going to go to the audio MetaSound source, or we could use the add button over here, and I'm going to give it a name. So under my file naming convention, I'm using MSO to determine that it's a MetaSound source, and I'm using OST to say that it's a one-shot, and it's going to be a spooky one-shot. If we double click on that, we're opening our MetaSound editor. So we've used this before, but let's just go through it in a little bit more detail. So on the left, you've got the members tab, which includes the variables, so the inputs, the outputs, and actual variables themselves. We've got the interfaces tab, and we've got the details tab that shows the details of whatever node you've got currently selected. Or if you don't have a node currently selected, it will show you this, which is the MetaSound details. So you can control the output format, which we've looked at briefly already, and the source, which has things like voice management that we've briefly discussed, and where you can set an attenuation. And later on, you can get into setting effects and things like that, and sound classes. We've looked at the nodes menu, which is from the right click. And here we've got all our possible functions that we can use in our MetaSounds. And we've looked at the idea of dragging out from the nodes to connect them to other nodes. And that's basically how you build your systems. There's a few more details in the PDF, but I'm going to try and talk you through what I'm doing. So hopefully you can pick things up as we go along. Okay, so we want to play a spooky sound, and that sound is a sound wave, so we're going to need a wave player. So I've right-clicked, and in my nodes menu, I'm going to choose a wave player mono, because the spooky sound is going to come from a specific source in space. So there's my wave player. When it plays, the audio is going to come out of here. So we're going to connect that to the output. So I've just left-clicked and dragged and to connect those two. And when the MetaSound plays, we want the wave player to play. When the MetaSound has finished playing, we want it to stop and disappear out of memory. So we're not dealing with it and processing it anymore. And by default, the MetaSounds have this one-shot interface. So on finished, when this wave player is finished playing, I'm going to connect it up to that on finished output, and that's going to stop the MetaSound completely. As we've seen before, if it's a looping sound or if it's a retriggering MetaSound that you want to can stay alive, then you need to delete this one-shot interface. So we're going to add a sound wave to our wave player, and we can do this using the drop-down menu. We could go, let's search for spooky sounds, and the one I want is a spooky creak. We can add it there, and we can audition that. Okay, so that's suitably spooky. Just like in the ambient sound actor and most other nodes in Unreal Engine, you can also use this assign button here. So if we find our sounds in the content browser, then if it's selected there, and I press this button, it will assign whatever is currently selected. So that was playing Spooky Creek 1, it's now playing Spooky Creek 4. Even more spooky. If we wanted to jump back out and find the sound in the content browser, we browse to it and it jumps out straight there, and it's got that sound selected, so that's useful on some occasions. But we don't want this to play the same sound every time. If every time it plays this creaky door, then it's going to affect the immersion of the player because it's not realistic. In the real world, you wouldn't have exactly the same creaky door creaking in exactly the same way throughout the level. So what we want to do is to have a container of sound waves that we can randomly choose. And a container of variables is an array of variables. So there's a few ways in which we can do this. Let's just do it in this way first. So we're in the members tab and we're going to say we want a new variable. We are going to call that variable spooky sounds. So the variable that it's created is by default a float, so that's a floating point number, but we don't want our variables to be floating point numbers, we want them to be sound waves. So helpfully, these aren't actually called sound waves, they're called wave assets. So that variable is now changed, so it's a wave asset. So in theory, we could drag that in and we could connect it up and it will now play that wave asset. However, that's still just playing one sound. So that's not what we want. We want to change that to an array of sounds. And you can see instantly it disconnects because you can't connect a group of sounds to an input that's expecting one sound. There's our array of spooky sounds, and we can add our sounds to it here. So we can use the add element button and we could search for our sounds and we could add them one by one, but that is slow and painful, so we don't want to do that. What we want to do is find them in the content browser and add a bunch of them at the same time. It's an array, it's going to hold a bunch of sounds. So if I've got my creaks here, I'm going to select them all. I'm going to press Control C, and now I can right click here and I can paste them all in at once. That's much quicker. Even quicker than that is if I have Control C, copied them here, I can go here and I can press my Shift and left mouse button and that also pastes them in. Or you can grab them and pull up this window and drop them. So there's lots of different ways of adding your sound waves to an array, or indeed any other variable to an array. So that's one way of doing it. Let's delete that and I'll show you another way of doing it, which is something that we're going to be doing quite a lot, and that is dragging out of a node to promote that to a variable. So if we go, there's a wave asset input there, we drag out and we say promote that to a graph variable. Okay, now we have a wave asset variable and we can name that spooky sounds. The good thing here is that it's going to automatically create the variable of the correct type. So if we drag out from a time node, it's going to create a time variable. If we drag out from a float node, it's going to create a float variable. So it's quite a useful way of speeding things up. So we've now created our wave asset variable. We make it into an array. We add the sounds and then we're back where we started. So let's just drag and drop those sounds into that array. The next thing we want to do is to randomly get one of those sounds from the array and send it into the wave player. So I'm going to drag out of the array and it will only find the functions or nodes that are relevant to that array. So I'm looking for random and I find the random get. So when we play, I'm going to trigger the random get that's going to pick a wave asset or a sound wave. It's going to output it here. I'm going to send that through to my wave player. Now I want my wave player to be triggered when the random get has got its sound. So I'm going to kind of connect them up like that. So now we have a bunch of sounds in our array, and every time the MetaSound is played, it's going to pick a random one of those and play it. You might have spotted something that is a bit undesirable there, in that it does pick randomly from all these sounds, but the nature of random being random, we did actually hear two of the same sounds played back to back, which again is kind of unusual, which we wouldn't expect in the natural world, and probably something that we want to avoid. We'll look at a solution to that in a second. Firstly, let's set up another little piece of debugging that is going to be useful to us so we can actually see which sound waves are being played each time. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to find a print log, and that's going to be a string, so basically the name of the sound wave, and I'm going to drag out from this value output here, and I'm going to get wave info. So I'm going to drag out of this name output, and that's the value that I want to print to the log, and I'm going to print that when the sound plays. So where is our output log? Well, we can't see it yet. We need to go Window, Output Log here. I'm going to drag it down, put it at the bottom of the screen there. I'm holding my right mouse button to move the graph around. So now when I play, you can see in the log, it's telling us which sounds are actually playing. And there again, we've got a repeated sound. We'll come to that in a second. Firstly, just want to talk about weights. So this is a way of saying one sound might be more likely to play than another. So this is an array of float variables. Again, I could click here on variables, create a float variable, make it into an array, or I could just drag out here and go promote to graph variable, and it automatically creates a variable of the right type. So in my spooky sound array of sound waves or wave assets, how many sounds do I actually have? Well, this is the first thing that you need to be aware of when we're dealing with arrays, is that the first index of an array is 0. Okay? This is something that once you get into MetaSounds more and blueprints and building your own systems will trip you up 1,000 times, which it has done for me. In arrays, in computing language, the first index is 0. So in fact, in this array, we don't have 5 sounds in the array, we have 6. So when we look at our weights array, we want to create a weight for each of those 6 sounds, and maybe we want to make some more likely than others, or less likely. If we set some values in here, so for example, I'm just making, I really like that first creak and I want it to be much more frequent than the others. So the first creak has a weight of 50 and the others have a weight of 10. The first one is creak 02. So what I should see when I'm looking at my output log is that creak 02 is much more frequent than the others. There we go. And again. That's a lot. So I'm just going to... Okay, so you can see that because it's got this weight of 50, it's much more frequent than the other sounds. So that's useful. If you've got a sound that you want to happen very rarely, you could have a much lower weight than all the other sounds. Or, as we just shown, if you want a sound to be much more frequent than the others, then you can balance its weights. Using weights, however, doesn't solve the problem that we've come across already, and that is the issue of some sounds repeating immediately, which feels a bit weird and is likely to break the player's immersion in the game. So I've just set the weights back to be equal for the moment. Now we do have a solution to this within the random get, and that's this number of repeats. So the number of elements to track to avoid repeating in a row. So say we've got 6 sounds in our array. If I made that 3, then it's going to track the previous 3 sounds that have played, and it will not repeat any of those sounds. It will pick a new sound instead of repeating. So that's going to create a bit of distance between any sounds being repeated exactly. For this to work, we need to tick Enable Shared State. And we're only actually going to hear it and see it working when this sound is played in game. Because if we play this MetaSound here in the MetaSound editor, it's not storing a memory of which sounds have been played before. It's completely fresh each time. So we need to find a way of auditioning this in game to see if this is working or not. So let's jump into the game and create some simple interaction. Now, when we set up the console commands, we use the key event to trigger those console commands. So we can do the same thing here, just to trigger our sound and audition it. So I'm opening the level blueprint, and I could right click and find a keyboard event, or I can just copy this one. And I'm going to use a different key. So over here on its details panel, I'm going to select the input key, and I'm going to press a key on my keyboard. In this case, it's going to be 1. So that's a nice shorthand for swapping out the keys of a keyboard event. Just select it, select the keyboard, and press the key that you want. The same applies for gamepad inputs as well. So when I press 1, I want to play sound, and I'm going to just play sound 2D at the moment. And I want to play the MetaSound I've just created. So I'm just going to jump to it in the browser here, and then attach it to that play sound 2D. Just going to check that those are off, which they are because I've copied the one that was already existing. So now when I play my game, I should be able to press 1, and I should be able to hear my sounds and also see that they are operating with that no repeat system. Okay, so those first 4 sounds, they have not repeated. So it works, the number of repeats to make kind of the distance between a sound repeating as large as you can make it, works in the level, but not in a MetaSound editor. That's worth bearing in mind, so you don't waste lots of time changing this number, playing around with these variables, not getting the outcome you expect.